Yep. So, we have fell into the API integration part for now, and we have already seen what Postman can do and like how Fetch APIs and Axios works. So today we will start working on the location search bar, and like we actually like merged these two sections on like 23rd and 24th that we were going to cover. So today we are actually going to work on the location search bar with auto suggestions, and then whatever is being returned from the search bar, we'll actually save that into the state that we made yesterday. I know that the React Redux part that we covered yesterday was a little like you know uh, like counterintuitive, but it gets easy with practice. So like the one thing that you need to keep track of is that there's always a root reducer, and the root reducer is like the super state that basically combines all the smaller states, and each of these smaller states can be referred to by their properties, the property names that we specify under the root reducer. Then using this root reducer, that is basically the super state, we create the whole store. So the reducer creates the store, and then that store is used to store all the state. So we provide that store to the provider here. So we basically specify that we are going to use this store, and this provider is basically provides this particular store to all the components. So since this provider is wrapping the app component, the this particular store can now be accessed from anywhere inside the app, like any of the children or siblings of app. So not siblings, like any of the descendants of app. Okay, so that's what the provider is responsible for. Under the hood, this is also using the context API, like the React context API, but it's not re-rendering the app again and again, because the context is not changing. What is changing is the whatever value is stored inside the context. So the re-render doesn't happen on the app level, it happens at individual places in our application. Okay, that is why we also use the use selector hooks. That is why individual components inside the application are re-rendered based on which states are being affected. Okay, so so that was it for the store part. And basically then from your root reducer, we can create n number of folders, and in each of those folders we can create we can store a separate part of our application as a state, as a global state. So I wanted all of the configuration data to be stored in one single place. So that is why I stored my unit over here. Even if I wanted to add a dark theme, that the theme would be stored over here as well, and the theme can be a boolean value or
Sibi,
anything.
where are you
Yeah.
sharing a screen?
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, I did actually share. I don't know why it didn't start. Okay, is my screen visible now?
Yeah, yes, yes.
Okay. So yeah, so as I was saying, from the root reducer, each of the we specify what all needs to be combined into a super state, and then we create a store from there, and we specify that store in the provider over here, and this provider basically gives us access to this store from anywhere inside the app, right? And then for separating our state into different sections, because that basically increases the organization level of our state, we create different folders. We can create n number of folders to store different types of stateful data in our stateful variables in our application. So basically all of the config that I wanted to store can be stored inside the config state, or the config reducer to be precise. And in here I can specify, for example, if I wanted to add a theme, that would go inside the config. I mean, it doesn't really matter, it doesn't make a difference. If you wanted to store the theme under the location, you can do that, but then it would be hard to find it, right? So that's why we are separating these states into different sub states. Okay, that's the proper term. So for the location as well, we had an active and a preferred, but we have not started using it yet. So that's what we'll do today. Let's just start with implementing this particular part. Okay, so I'll start the server first of all. And today we'll be working on like the location search bar, and we'll try to also work on the auto suggestions part. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll actually just make the search bar in general. We won't be connecting it to Redux. And once we have all the auto suggestions and everything working, then only we'll actually connect it to Redux. Okay. So this is my hold on, just hold on. Okay. Yeah. So this is basically the whole what we have done so far, and if you remember precisely, we removed all of the things that were not related to when a location was not selected. So basically, everything that is related to a location is gone for now because there are no locations in the Redux state, right? But that is totally fine. Today we'll be working on the search bar, and from there we can get want to make it in a way that we get all the suggestions in a pop-up over here. So basically we'll get 5 to 6 suggestions, and from those suggestions we can then we can then add one of those suggestions as a as a location. And then at that point, when the user hits the add button beside each of the suggestions, then only we want to integrate our Redux state. So basically that location will be pushed to Redux, and then an API call would be made as well. Okay, so that's what we're gonna work now. So I'll just close everything down, and we'll be working on the location selector now. So for now, we're not actually using this actually we're gonna work on a search bar first of all. I'm so sorry about that. So in the search bar, what we're gonna do is first of all, what we need to do is we need to somehow keep track of what is being typed, right? Because every time the user types, we want to send an API call. So this is how the flow would be basically. So suppose I'm typing ch, that's when an API call would be made to search for every city related to the keyword ch. Okay, so that's where the first call would be made. And meanwhile, I'll also open weather API specification for the same. So if I go to the API page, and in here, if I search for geo coding, yeah, so the geocoding API. So if you look at the proper the specification for geocoding, there's this particular API which we are actually looking for. So this API will basically search places based on the city name, state code, and country code. So you can obviously emit all of this. So the state code and the country code is optional part, because if you look at this example, we are not actually using any state code or country code over here. So they've just searched for London, and they are getting all of these different results. So this is one single result, then the second result, and so on and so forth, right? So and then you also get the country for each of these. So Great Britain, and similarly CA, and so on and so forth. Okay. So we can show these results at least the city name and the country name whenever we start typing keywords. So the API call would be made so the API call would be made basically whenever the user starts typing, right? So React somehow needs to keep track of what is being typed, and by default, React doesn't know what is being typed because this is all on the browser. Like this is all on the real DOM. So instead of this being on the real DOM, the data that is being shown here has to somehow come from the virtual DOM, because React is only responsible for controlling the virtual DOM, right? So this is how we do it. If you go to the React documentation, or inputs, okay, you'll see that there are two types of inputs that are called controlled and uncontrolled input. Okay, so this is the uncontrolled input is basically all sorts of input that React can't control. So basically this is one such input. I can type anything, and it is being typed only on the real DOM. It is not React doesn't know anything about this, what this input contains. Okay, and then there's controlled inputs. So controlled inputs are basic, and this is actually true for any kind of elements that can be interacted with. So they are radio buttons, there's color pickers, and there's also check boxes. So all of these can be converted into a controlled component. So so what we need to do in order to keep track of what is being typed is that we need to change our input into a controlled input. And the way we do it is by showing the data in the particular input from a particular state. Okay, So this is how we actually achieve that. Like this is how we achieve that structure. First of all, let's import use state from React. Then we're going to use it. So the state name that I want to give is search keyword. Okay, because that's what because that's what the user is going to type here, right? So then we can do set search keyword, because this is a setter function, equals to use state, and the initial value for the search keyword would be empty because at first nothing is typed. Okay, now in order to make whatever is being shown in the input a controlled value, what we need to do is we basically need to show this state value as the content of that input. Okay, so the way we do it is by using the value prop. Okay, so in the value prop I'll specify search keyword. So now this input will only show whatever is being stored in this state variable. Okay, and it will only update whenever the state variable updates. So this input will the input value won't change when we are not updating the state variable, which is like we are currently not updating the state variable, right? We are not calling set search keyword anywhere. So if I go back here and I try to type, nothing will happen. I'm currently trying to type, but nothing's happening. And that is because like the event is being fired, like on the browser side, the change event is being fired. But when I'm typing, nothing is happening with that event, like because the data that is being shown is from React, right? But the event is being fired and we are not handling that event. We are not doing anything in that event. Okay. So now we can do that. Okay, so how do we do that? Whenever a person types in an input box, what happens is the change event is fired. So I'll write on change equals to, and I'll make a handler for this at the top. I'll call it handle input change, and this will get so basically this is a handler function. That is why it will get every information related to the event, and I'll store that in an object named e. And here in on change I'll put handle input change. So now I can start logging this thing, and let's see what is what is coming up in this e. Okay, so if now I start typing, so every time I press a button, I'll get a new synthetic base event. So this is basically the whole event object, and it will contain all kinds of information related to this particular event. Okay, so if we look at these properties, all of this is also JavaScript specific. So bubbles means that this event can bubble, and there's event bubbling is something that you can look into, but in simpler terms, it can be considered as if for example, I'll just give you an example of bubbling. So if you have a button or maybe a card type element, and inside that card you have a button, and both the card and the button are clickable. So in that case, if you are clicking on the button, you're also in turn clicking on the card, right? So if event bubbling is enabled by default, that event bubbling is actually enabled by default, then when you're clicking on the button, the card will automatically be clicked and the page will change. This is something that you won't want in a card like pattern, right? So in that case, you would need to like disable this bubbles prop over here, and we can do that by writing simply e dot stop propagation. Okay, this is a function that will stop event bubbling. So if after this I console log it and I try typing something, you'll see that bubbles is true, but it won't propagate. Like it's an information related to the particular event, but it won't be propagated because we have already called stop propagation. So then propagation won't happen. So this bubbles won't have any effect. Okay, but let's look into something that is actually related to what we need to do. So since I'm pressing some button and an event is being fired, I would want to store what button is being pressed into my state, right? So every time I press a button, that thing should be saved into this particular state, the search keyword state. So inside here, obviously I need to call set search keyword, but what do I need to write inside set search keyword? Which property do I need to write? Obviously that property would be somewhere inside this e object only, because this contains all the data related to the event. So what button is pressed should also be here. So let's look for such a similar data. So for example, I'm pressing B for now. Okay, and have I removed the log? Yeah, I have done that. Sorry about that. So I'll just add that back again, and I'll try pressing B now. So let's see if I can find B anywhere. So in the native event, I'll see that there is a data property that is storing B, right? So can we use it for our implementation? Yes, we can. We can write a simple set search keyword, and inside here we can write. This will basically tell me which button was pressed, right? So what I can do is I can set search keyword to whatever is the previous search keyword value plus e dot native event dot data. Okay, and this will totally work. If I start typing now, you'll see that this is working, right? But this will give me the data related to what button was pressed, right? So what if I press backspace? Would that work? No, that won't work because backspace is not a character, right? And all we are doing, let's see what's inside the data property of native event, and it's null this time because we haven't added any new data this time. We are removing some data. So the input type for adding the data was insert event, but the input type for pressing backspace was content delete backward. So using this way to set the date set the text is not a good way. Okay, so what other properties do we have? Well, React's documentation suggests us to use this particular property, which is inside the target. So the target is basically the target is basically present in all kinds of event, because any kind of event will happen on something, right? It will either happen on the whole page or some part of or some element on the page, right? So the target basically stores which element the event is happening on. So our event is happening on that particular input box, right? That's why the target contains everything related to that input box. And one property inside this input box is the value property. Okay, so you can see the value is currently storing a lot of stuff. Okay, so let me just comment it out and see what it gives us. So if I refresh and I try typing something, I go to target.value. So I'll see that this is empty, and this is coming as empty right now. But let's see, let's try to log just the target value. Okay, so if I just log this and I press different buttons, you'll see that it is actually coming up. Okay, why is this happening? Why is it that when I am pressing and when I was logging the whole thing, and then at that time I was pressing something, the value was empty. But now when I'm actually logging the whole thing, the value is coming up as only one thing, and it's not actually showing the whole thing like ASDFGH. It's not showing it as a single string. It is showing just A, and then it removes it. So the thing is that the value updates momentarily in terms of JavaScript, but since we are not actually setting it as the state using set search keyword, that is why when the next render happens for on the browser side, the search keyword is still an empty string, right? That is why the value gets set back to the original value, which is like empty string. That is why every time this event is being fired, it is actually combining whatever was already there with the button that was pressed, and it is showing me that value. That is why it's coming empty. So now if I actually call the set search keyword over here, if I do that, then you'll see that the logs will change. So I'll now add a log over here. Hold on, search keyword. So now the logs will start coming up. Okay, so now if I start typing, you'll see that the re-render is happening, and I'm getting a console log every time, right? So this is working properly, and the backspace is also working, and everything else. So that is why React recommends using this particular e.target.value. And this is how you can create any kind of control component. This is the only thing, like you can actually memorize this if you want. So this is how you create any kind of control component. You write a input change handler, and inside there you set a state, and then that state value goes back to the input as the value property. So that is how you do it, just by adding these two properties to any kind of input. Okay, so now we have a track of that state, and every time that state is changing, we can do something. So if by now you should be comfortable with this. So every time a state changes, we can do something by using the use effect hook. Okay. So I'll write a simple use effect, and a function will run when every time the search keyword is changing. Okay. So now inside here, we can write a function, which is, so let's see the API call that we want to make. So basically that's what we want to write over here, right? We need to call the API every time the search keyword changes. So I'll just do that now. So the API call that we want to use is this one only. So I'll just write Axios dot get, and you need to import Axios at the top for this. And inside this, I'll paste the whole API call. I can add an HTTPS at the start. And if I go back to app.js, I can copy a few stuff from over here, like the app ID. I'll just copy this. And by now, your app ID should also start working. So you can replace the app ID that Kunal gave us with the app ID that you created for by signing up for that particular website for OpenWeather. And in here, we can set some more properties. So for limit, limit is basically how many search results you want. So for limit, I want to set this to 6. And for this particular place where you get the city name, country, state code, and country code, we can do a single value over here, and this will be the search keyword. Okay, so this will actually get us all of the data. Then in the then block, I'll write res, and our log console.log res.data, and let's see what we are getting over here. Okay, so I'll go back and I'll try typing. It's saying request failed with code 404. So let's see what's wrong. Okay, let's see what we are doing wrong. It's saying 404. So the first thing that it said was nothing to geocode. And then it said not found. Okay. So this is the API call that we made. Let's try making this particular API call, because so they have used London over here, right? And the limit was 5. So let's just try to copy this as is and see if that works or not, first of all. So here we are actually having that state, right? Yep. And for the search keyword, we are sending that particular state to here. And in here, we are setting that state as e.target.value, right? So if I, instead of this, if I do London and save it, and I set the limit to 5, let's see if that gives us any data or not. So every time I update it, yeah. So now, so yeah, we did actually get a few data when we use London over here. Okay. So we are actually getting this data. So instead of using London, I'll now replace it with search keyword and see if this works or not. All right. Okay. So now, and this is not working. Okay. What if I? All right. So I think upon a little bit of debugging, you can figure out that when I'm typing typing in a single button, it's giving me a 404, two keys, still 404, and on 3 keys, I'm actually getting a result. Okay. So you can figure out that what I can say by this is that this API call only works if I have a minimum of 3 keywords. So let's just see that if that is actually true and if that is given anywhere or not. So this is the direct geocoding one. and let's see what we need over here. So does this say anywhere that we need at least three characters for the API call to work? I don't think it does. Okay, all right. And this is the reverse geocoding one, which we don't really need. So okay, let's then try to search for the whole thing. And do we find anything? Yes, we do. So these are the local names, the country, and also the final result. But this API is working is not really is working reliably as reliably as I want, because like for CHE it didn't give me Chennai, and it only gave me two results, even though I asked for five results by setting the limit to five. So let's see if we have any properties for that or not. So the number of locations in the API response, up to five results can be returned in the API response. But this is up to. What if I want to like have a minimum of these many responses? Like currently, it's not giving us that many responses, and but their own search bar. Like if I search over here, I think we get multiple responses, and I think that's possible. Like if I start searching over here, okay, they don't have a like suggestive API in place. So I think this API doesn't really give us like all of the responses that are like possible. So instead of like getting five, I mean that's a bummer, because I was planning to like show at least five suggestions for any kind of keyword. But if that is not possible, then I think we have to work with what is available to us. So let's see what we can do. So when I actually typed CHEN, I was getting like two responses, and none of them were Chennai. But like if I press CHENN, I was not getting any responses. But then again, when I pressed A, I got one response, and on pressing I actually got the whole response. So this is not exactly what we were looking for. Like this API is not exactly what we were looking for, and there must be some other API out there that like works better than this. I mean, better than the OpenWeather API, and it could also be that the price, because we are using the free tier of OpenWeather API, that's why it's not working properly. But that is totally fine, because like we are still getting the details for a particular location properly, right? So we can still store it at like in our Redux store, and like we can still show it as a suggestion over here. So let's just work with this for now. Later on, if we find a better API, we can obviously replace that. Okay. So what I'll do is, so the log that we are getting is an array, right? So this is basically all the suggestions that we can get. So upon getting the response, I'll store that in a state called suggestions. So suggestions and set suggestions equals to use state, and the suggestions would be an array, right? And in here, I'll do set suggestions res.data. Okay. And in cases when this response is not actually coming, that is because the search keyword is less than three letters long. Okay. So we will totally avoid that by actually writing a if statement over here. We'll do search keyword dot length is greater than equals to 3, then only we need to call the API. Okay, and then only we need to set that data. So every time, so now all the possible values that can be stored in suggestions is either an array containing the results or an empty array, like in this case, right? So we need to now handle those things down at the bottom here. So this was the search bar container, right? And the search bar container basically contains everything related to like it contains it is a flex box that contains this icon, the input, and the other icon, right? So we'll obviously implement the functionality for this icon as well. But for now, what we'll do is that we'll modify the search bar container a bit. So in here, I'll do div, and I'll wrap this whole input into a div. And below this, I'll create another div for the suggestions. So I'll actually call this a section. Okay. And the search bar container, everything that was defined inside the search bar container actually now needs to go into the div. And this div can have a class name of input, okay, or search input. And then in here, I'll do dot search input and paste the whole thing. And at the top, we can now so this is basically the whole thing. This doesn't make a difference in terms of the look, but now we have a section over here where we can add all our suggestions. Okay, so now we'll do that. Okay, so for the suggestions, I want this to be an absolutely positioned box with a fixed width, and I'm doing this because I'm doing this because I want that the suggestions box can overflow this particular div. So its parent is this thing, right? So the max width that this section can go to is basically the width of its parent, right? But if I want to avoid that, what I can do is I can use position absolute, and I can pull that section out of the div. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna do, and for that I'll add some dummy data over here. So I'll actually use an extension for this, and I'll add 4 paragraphs of data. Okay, so currently, as you can see, it is all contained inside this div, right? This particular div. But I want this to be to overflow this div, so the suggestions box can be as big as wide as possible, as wide as I want at least. Okay, so what I'll do is for section, I'll use position absolute. Okay, and whenever you're using position absolute, you need to specify another div which would be relative to which you are actually absolutely positioning it. Okay, so I want this to be absolutely positioned with relative to its parent. Okay, that is why on the parent, I'll write position relative. Okay, now whenever I set the top left bottom right properties on the section, that will happen relative to this parent, this whole div. Okay, so now this thing is absolutely positioned, so I'll provide it a width of 50 viewport width. Okay, all right, so now you can see that it can easily go out of this div, right? So it can have a width independent of whatever the width the div, that particular div has. So I'll also add a like add some kind of hint that this is a pop-up. So the way I want to do it is I'll add a border to it, border 1px solid and #888. Let's see how that looks. I mean, I'm not really happy with this, but that's fine for now. This should do for now. And I'll also add a border radius of let's see 8px.
Where
Yeah,
I was looking, there's something called a data list tag. Can we not use that here?
data list tag. Let's see.
Yes.
I've not really ever, looked into it, but let's see. So yeah, the data list tag is used with the input element only. So in that, like, we can totally use that, and that is actually the most semantic way to do it. So you'll get this data list, and from there you can select a particular option. But you can see that when we do that, the data list tag is actually it's not a visual element. It just instructs your browser to show something, right? So the UI for this is not managed by you and cannot be managed by you. It is only managed by the browser, right? But what we wanted to do was we wanted to add we wanted to include
Add
an
button.
add button over here, right? And whenever we click that add button, that particular location gets added to our preferred location list. That is why we
Okay.
can't use this over here. Although this is a good suggestion, like you can use this for many other things. So this can be used whenever you want to make a autofill kind of element. But currently we just want to make an auto suggest, right? Like there's a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
So the
So
option, that thing, that drop down which is coming, it's a browser drop down.
yeah, like the browser, it is browser specific. So for Chrome, it is coming like this. But if I open the same thing in Edge, it will come in a different way. So for Edge, this is how it looks.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
Yeah. All right. So, but yeah, that is a good element. I myself didn't really remember that. Like, there are many such elements that are very niche in terms of uses. That's why like it's not it doesn't make a difference in early stages of development to remember these elements. So okay, so moving on. I'm not really happy with this, this layout, but this should do for now. And like you can obviously if customize this in a better way than me, but let's just work with what we have for now. So what I want the div to actually be 100 viewport width. Okay, so this will actually span the whole thing. And then I'll do a simple calculation to subtract some, give some padding to it. So the padding that I'll specify is, first of all, from left, we have how much? It is 42, right? So I'll need to subtract 42 from here on the left, and from the right as well, I'll subtract the same amount. So the way we can do such a calculation is by using the calc function. Inside here, I'll specify 100 viewport width, and then I'll subtract 42 into 2, that is 84 px. Okay, this is now the width of this div. Okay, but I have specified the width for I specified the width for now, and this will be followed for like all screen sizes, right? But at the max screen width, it doesn't really look good. So at the max screen width, I can clamp the width by using a max width property. And for max width, I'll specify the width to be 400 px. So it won't go beyond 400, or maybe 500 px. Okay, so it won't go beyond this width. But at smaller sizes, it will reduce in size, because it should be visible at all screen sizes, and it should not go beyond the screen width. Okay, all right. So now let's provide it a background color of white, and let's also add some padding to it. Padding of 1 rem. Okay, or okay, so 1 rem and 0.5 rem for the top and bottom padding. Yeah, this is, I'm happy with this. And then let's add some box shadow. So for box, getting really good box shadows, there is this website that I use, and I'll just paste this link as for you guys as well. And you can find a box shadow that you guys prefer. So the one that I would want to use for such a pop-up, it has to be something that looks like it is actually floating. So I'm gonna use I'm gonna use this one. All right. So I just click on it and it copies, and I can paste that over here, and I get that box shadow for now. Okay. So since this box shadow is really prominent, I'll just remove the border because that looks unnecessary. And this is my suggestions box basically. All right. I'll actually add the border left property, and that will give me a border on the left hand side, because this looks good for me. So all right, with this and a bit more customizations, a pop-up, the look for a pop-up is complete. Okay, with this let's start working on what we'll show inside it. So inside this section we can show we can show a list of all every a list of all the results that is coming from the API, which is being stored in the suggestions over here. So the way we show an array in terms of HTML, in terms of HTML format, is by using array function that is called map. So what map does is, if you look at the MD and docs for map, you'll find out that map is used for, I can open it properly. So not this map, this one. Yeah. So you'll find out that maps basically is used to do some kind of operation on an array and return a new array. Okay. So in our scenario, our suggestions is basically an array of JSON objects, right? Because each of the suggestions contains a city name, then the country code, and so on and so forth. So in here as well, we have this array of JSON objects, and we need to convert that array of JSON objects into an array of elements, right? Because React can easily show an array as a set of elements, but they have to be like things that can be shown on the page. Okay, they should either be an array of strings or an array of elements. So for now, we want to show a complex element for each of the array item, right? That's why we'll return an array of elements using the map function. Okay, so this is how we do it. We write suggestions dot map, and then for each suggestion, this time I'm using a singular, and I'll write an arrow function, and from there I'm returning something. For each suggestion, I want to return an article which will contain, first of all, let's see what it was printing earlier. So every suggestion contains the country and the name, right? And then there are local names and much more stuff, but we are only interested in the name and the country. Okay, so for each suggestion, I want to first of all show suggestion dot name, and then by adding a comma, I want to show suggestion dot country. Okay, so now if I start typing, for example, if I write CHENN, I should probably get like an array, but that is not working for some reason. And this is a warning that basically React is giving us, because a key prop is needed whenever you're using a map function. So this is to keep track of each of these articles, and if they are having different handler functions and stuff, then key prop is always a necessary prop whenever you're using map. Because if you're not using a key prop, then you'll have like unforeseen bugs and glitches in your components, and these are really hard to pinpoint. But most of the times they are because of missing out a key prop somewhere around. So at the very top of whatever you're returning from the map, you need to specify a key prop, and the key should be a unique string, okay, for each of these suggestions, so that React is able to identify which article tag is which element of the array. Okay, so for key, let's see what we can use. So I wanted to go into the console. Inside the console, we have the lon and lat, and the longitude and latitude is something that will be unique for each place, right? But we need to combine them, and then we can use that as a string for the key prop. But there is also the country code. So what I want to use as a key prop is basically this whole thing. So this thing can, as it is, be used for the key prop over here. Okay, so it will be suggestion dot name, then add a plus, and suggestion dot country. And since both of these are strings, when they are concatenated, when they are added, the whole thing will also be a string, and it should possibly pretty much be a unique string, like almost all the times. Okay, so that is fine. So this should now work, and that warning should go away. But now let's see if it is and let's just log that rest.data at the top as well. Rest.data. Okay. So with this, if I start typing, so we'll get all of these suggestions that we want. And like this is working really, like this seems really snappy for me. And it's working very, very well, right? Like the suggestions are coming up really quickly. So I do have a few, suggestions for what we can do with this, like how we can optimize this. So currently, one thing that is happening is that every time I'm changing even a single letter, then the API call is going through and it is giving me the new set of suggestions. Okay, this is something that we should not do, because we should also understand that a user can make typos, right? So in case when a user, instead of writing A, he or she hits S, then in that case and then quickly goes back and hits A, then in that case, if there are three different API calls being made, for one for hitting S, then hitting backspace, then hitting A, there are actually three API calls going through. We don't really need to do that. We need to add some kind of debouncing, so that the API call is made only when when the user has typed something and has waited for at least half a second. So that this kind of behavior, when you basically wait before the user's input has gone through and the user has stopped typing, and then you send the API call, it's called adding a debounce. Okay, this is basically you're debouncing the user's typos. So you're not making API calls every time the state is changing. You are waiting for a while before making the API call. Okay, so now we need to implement that. So currently this use effect is fired every time the search keyword state is changing, right? We need to fix that by adding a debounce somehow. So the way we do it is, obviously this use effect will fire again and again, but what we need to do is, this is how we work on it. So I'll actually open Paint to explain it. So first of all, we'll take user input. Okay, we'll take user input, then when obviously this will update the state. So we'll instruct the browser to send an API call after 500 millisecond. Okay, so I'll write send API after 500 ms. Okay, all right. So after 500 milliseconds, API call will go. All right. But if during these 500 milliseconds another input has come along, okay, so basically we do this part, send API after 500 milliseconds, by using a function called set timeout. Okay, so we are basically storing this timeout somewhere whenever we are setting the timeout. Okay, and when this API call has okay, and if 500 milliseconds has gone has already gone, so the API call will already go through. But if before these 500 milliseconds another user input comes along, if this basically user input is coming along again, then in that case what we need to do is first cancel this timeout, and then then create another another request to send an API call after 500 milliseconds. Okay, so this is basically a feedback loop which will create the debounce behavior for us. So the API call will go through after 500 milliseconds, but if that if under that 500 millisecond the state is changing again, then we'll cancel that API call and then send another API call. Okay, so let's see how we can implement this. So first thing that we need to do, because this timeout will be like a global timeout, right? The same timeout will be used again and again and cancelled and then fired again and so on and so forth. So we'll store this timeout somewhere. Okay, we can either create a global variable for this. Okay, like over here we can create a variable like let timeout equals to something. For example, at first it should be null, because at first we are not setting the timeout. Okay, but if we do this, this is basically an anti-pattern in React. So any kind of global variable that you want to use, you should create a ref for it. So for creating ref or a reference, we use a hook called useRef. Okay, and then over here what we can do is const timeout equals to useRef, and inside here you don't really need to provide anything. Whenever you don't provide anything, the ref is basically an empty it points to a null reference, so the value that it stores is null. Or you can actually provide an initial value if you want. So I'll provide null just in case, like just to be sure, we provided a value of null. Okay, now inside the use effect, when the user has actually sent like type 3 keywords, then what we need to do is, or over here, like before even like checking for the number of keywords, we need to set a timeout. So we'll do uh, okay, let's see how we can do that. First of all, we'll see if timeout equals uh, uh, Okay, we can, for null we can check it like this. So if timeout is null, then in that case we'll do timeout dot current equals to set timeout, and in here we can write the API call. So we can write get or fetch suggestions. Okay, and this is the callback basically, and then we can add a we can specify the delay in milliseconds for this timeout. So this fetch suggestions will be called only after 5000. Okay, but if timeout dot current actually, like if timeout actually holds something, so basically timeout dot current actually holds something, so in that case in the else statement we first need to cancel timeout. Okay, so I'll write cancel or delete timeout, I think. Or was it remove timeout?
Your timeout.
Clear timeout, yeah, sorry.
Uh,
Clear
I
timeout,
have one doubt. Can you
yeah.
check the chat box?
Yeah, sure. So let timeout equals to null, clear timeout, timeout equals to set timeout. Yeah, exactly. So you basically call the API call after clearing the timeout every time. So yeah, this is like instead of using an if else, you can obviously do that, because like whenever the whenever the timeout is null and you're trying to clear a null value, it will not give you an error and it will not do anything. It will silently not work. Okay, so this is also a good way, like how Kunal suggested in chat box. So yeah, we can do that as well, because but I was trying to be more specific here, so that is why I handled both of those cases for when the timeout was null and when the timeout actually has some value. But we can obviously do that as well. So let's just try that out. Okay, so we'll clear timeout, and before that obviously timeout is always null. So let's just remove this two statements over here, and then in the fetch suggestions, I copied the whole function from before, so I'll just write fetch suggestions over here, and this should be an API call. So I'll paste whatever we copied. Okay. All right, I think I didn't copy that, so I'll just write the whole thing again, or let's just time travel a bit. Okay, so yeah, this is what we needed to copy. Let's just go back. Okay, so this is our fetch suggestions function, and this will be called basically after like 500 milliseconds if there wasn't another use effect fired. So if another use effect is fired, the timeout will automatically get cleared, and the fetch suggestions will be called even again, like fetch suggestions would be called after that 500 milliseconds. So I hope this makes sense, and let's see if this works. So yeah, so currently we still have this length check over here, so that should work as well. So I'll go back here, I'll clear everything, and are we logging this data? So yeah, we are. So I'll type A and see if the API calls goes through, and it doesn't. That should be fine, because at two characters it won't work, but at the third character, did the API call go through? Yeah, it did go through, and we got an empty array. So I'll write CHE, and it sent an API call, but I'll write NN, and did it send two different API calls? Yes, it did. So for CHEN, it sent an API call, and for NN, it sent another API call. So this is not really working, and that is because we haven't specified anything inside the clear timeout. And I'll just paste it here, like that was an issue on my part. So okay, so let's see if this works or not. So I'll write CHE, and one API call went through. So now if I press N two times, only one API call should go through, and that will basically tell us that yeah, this whole debounce behavior is working. So I'll press NN two times, and only one API call is going through. So yeah, the debounce is working properly. So if I write AI as well, only one API call went through. So the debounce is working perfectly. So this is what we wanted for the debounce behavior. And now we can start styling these elements, each of the suggestions. So in the article, what I want to do is I'll I'll add a padding of 0.5 rem and 1 rem, or maybe 0.25 rem and 0.5 rem. All right. You can actually remove this padding because the parent element already has some padding. Okay, and for here we can add only a vertical padding. So each of these elements will have a vertical padding but not any horizontal padding. And then these elements should be a display flex because we want to show a button as well. Okay, the text size is fine for now. I don't want to mess around with the text size. And then we need to add a button inside it. Okay, so for the button, let's just add the button first of all. So there should be a div which will contain the name, and then there should be a button which will contain the text add. Okay, and we'll implement the on click for this later on, but let's just style it for now. The color should be white. There should be an all inset. Okay, and here I'll add a background color. So I'll take that background color from the design. So this is the color that I want to pick for this. Okay, and I'll paste it in the background color property. All right, and then since this was a flex, we can specify align item center and then justify content space between, because I want this button to be at the very end. Okay, so with this, I'll also add a few more properties. So when at smaller screen sizes, these elements are seen can be seen properly. So I'll add first of all flex 1 for the div, and also min width 0, and then I'll add a text overflow. First of all, I'll add overflow hidden, and then text overflow ellipsis. Okay, so what this gives us is that whenever I resize this box and I go below this size, okay, this is actually not working. Let's see why that's not working properly. So I specified a min width of 0 px. This should be px, maybe. Yeah, if you look at it, so oh yeah, there should also be white space no wrap. So I'll explain each of these properties now. So the min width basically says that it can go below the width of its content. So the width of the div can go below the width of its content. Then I specified white space no wrap so that that wherever there is a space bar, the content doesn't overflow to the new next line. It doesn't wrap to the next line. So white space no wrap. Then overflow hidden specifies that whatever overflows the parent div is actually hidden and not shown. And then the text overflow ellipsis property actually adds these 3 dots at the end. Okay, so this is how you add a simple truncating behavior to your components. Okay, now I'll style this button a bit. So padding of okay, let's see, 0.5 rem and 1 rem. All right, and a border radius of 4px. Okay, and cursor pointer. All right, I think this should work. Oh, yeah, so this is now working. I'll also add a few transitions for this, although that is not necessary right now. But so filter to 150 ms ease, and then in its hover pseudo selector, I'll add filter brightness 1.05, and in the active pseudo selector I'll add filter brightness uh, 0.95. So what this gives us is whenever I hover over it, it glows up, and whenever I click, it becomes dimmer. So there's a click and hover effect on this button now. All right. So with this, this particular like card is complete, and now we basically need to do two things. Whenever we click the add button, first thing that we need to do is push this to the first thing that we need to do is do an API call. Okay, so the API call for this particular area and get the the details, the weather data for this particular location. Then close this, first of all, close this whole div. So basically, in order to close this, we can do a simple check here. So what we can do is when suggestions dot length equals 0, or when suggestions dot length is greater than 0, then this div will then this section will be shown, or else it would not be shown. So whenever we set the suggestions to an empty array, this box should go away, and at the same time we'll also set the search keyword back to a empty string. Okay, so I'll add the on click handler for this, and I'll add all three of these things. Okay, and in here I'll also get the index, because I'll actually use the, or maybe not, I'll not actually use the index. I'll use the suggestion as itself to get the data related to the suggestion to the handler itself. Okay, so the way we do that is I'll write an input handler over here, handle uh, add button equals to, and in here we'll get, so for this is a handler obviously, so you would think that it can only get an event all the time, but obviously we can call these handlers manually. So in here, when we specify on change as handle input change, this function would be called by the change handler, right? Change event listener, right? But in here, what I want to do, I want to specify extra properties along with this click event listener, right? So instead of just specifying specifying the handler like handle add button, what I'll do is I'll actually call it. So there are two ways to do this. I'll tell you the easy way. I'll specify a function here instead of actually calling the whole thing. I'll specify a function, because onClick will always only accept a function. So I specified a function, and inside that function I'll call handle add button with the parameters that I want to give it. So I'll give it the whole suggestion. From here I'll give it to here. Okay, so now handle add button will get the suggestion object from the array, like for whichever suggestion it is being like clicked, whichever suggestion it is being fired. And then in the handle add button we need to do three things: clear input, reset suggestions, do API call for current suggestion, for selected suggestion, then finally store response in Redux. Okay, so let's start doing each of these. So first of all, I'll do set search keyword to empty. Then I'll reset the suggestions array by set suggestions to an empty array. Then I'll do the API call. So now our API call won't be happening over here. It would actually be happening in the search bar. Okay, so how do we do it? Or maybe it can actually happen, there are actually multiple ways to achieve this, but I prefer that the API calls happen over here. Okay, so that's how we will do it. So in the handle add button, we are actually doing the API call and we're saving that data. But what if we want to do the API call whenever, like when that particular thing is open? Okay, let's see how we can do this. So we can just in here, instead of doing the API call, we can just add this particular location to the Redux store, and then the API call can be made from over the app.js. Okay, because we have already written it over here, right? And this API call is also responsible to refetch the data when the unit state changes. The unit state changes when we click the toggle button, right? So what we'll do is in here we'll only store the suggestion, everything related to the suggestion in Redux. So let's see how our Redux location Redux was looking. So in the preferred, this is what we wanted to save, right? For any particular location, we wanted to store the name. Okay, along with the name we wanted to store an id and the data. Okay, so the data and the data would be a object again. So the data and id actually comes from app.js, right? But this particular name, it is coming from our geocoding api or the search bar. Okay, so we need to create an action that will only add the name over here. Okay, and then call the API, and then finally add the ID and the data. Okay, so this is a little more complex. So let's tackle it one by one. So in the location add, if we go to this particular action, okay, so we have add preferred location, right? We won't be getting the data and ID over here. Okay, when we are adding a preferred location, we'll only get the name. Then in the reducer, uh, under the location add, we'll set that action name into the state, and we'll remove this part. Okay, and we should also obviously add a check for whether the name is already in the already in the Redux array or not. But instead of adding that check like that, what we can do is we can remove any kind of suggestions from here. We can disable this button for suggestions that are already added. Okay, so we'll do that later on, bro. So for now, we can add a suggestion to the Redux like this. We'll just add the name for now. Okay, so from here, we'll call this particular action. Which action? This action, add preferred location, and give it the name that we want to add. All right. So this is how I'll do that. I'll use the use dispatch hook for this. So let's create the use dispatch hook. Const dispatch equals to use dispatch. Okay. And you'll also need to import that at the top. So I've done that over here, use dispatch. Then over here, I'll call dispatch, and the thing that we need to dispatch is add preferred location, and it is inside store location actions. So this is the one that we need to use, and this will get a string. Okay, so the string would be formed by two variables, by combining two variables or two properties from the suggestion object. So the suggestion object had the suggestion name and country, right? So that's what we'll use. Suggestion dot name, comma suggestion dot country. Okay. So this is a location that will be added to the preferred location array. Okay. Over here. Let's see if we can log that somewhere. So we were taking out that location state over here, right? Let's just log it. Okay. Console log location state, and see if that is actually being updated whenever we click the add button or not. So if I hit the add button, and I will go to console for this. Okay, I'll hit the add button and nothing is updating. Why is it not updating? I'm calling the add preferred location function in the handle add button, and nothing is actually updating, and that is weird. Let's just see if this is being called or not. Handle add button is being called or not. So in the on click of the add, we are actually calling this handle add button with a particular suggestion, right? And at the start, let's see if this function is being called or not. So I'll write called. Okay, I'll click the add button. Okay, maybe this is stuck, so I'll just hit refresh. All right. So this preferred location has an empty array for now. That is something that I added just for an example. So I'll remove it. Okay. And I'll start typing something. Let's just refresh this as well. And I'll start typing something for now. I'll type CHE. And I got a console log from the search bar. Then I'll click the add button. And yeah, the function was called and the location state updated. Now it has a preferred location, that is CHE comma LA, right? So now this auto suggestion box also closed, and the state is also reset for this. So now this is working fine, right? Okay, so that was a bit too much, but let's see if we can finish this by today. So the suggestion box worked flawlessly, and we are getting the state back to our, the preferred location over here. Now we need to somehow send this preferred location down to this array over here, right? When this preferred location got filled, it obviously showed the whole UI to us, right? So now we need to do a few more things. First thing that we need to do is, so in this reducer, if you remember correctly, the active was null, right? Because at the first, there was nothing in the preferred location array. So what we need to do, when the first, the first item is added to this array, we'll also set the active to a certain value, okay? So the way we do that is, after we set preferred over here, actually before that we can do active colon, and now active can either be null or something else. So what we can do is, okay, let's see. So if state dot preferred dot length equals 0, which means that there were no elements till now, but now location add is called, so obviously there has to be one element. So now if this was true, then now the active element should be the 0th element, okay? Else it should be state dot active, okay? Or else it should be okay, whenever we add a new element, the flow should be that the user automatically gets to see the data of the new element, obviously, right? So it should scroll to that particular element, right? So what we can do is, instead of doing this, we can set the active index to basically the last element, because at any given point of time we are adding an item to the very end, right, of this preferred array. So the active should always point to the last element whenever this action is being fired. So this is how I do it. I'll write preferred dot sorry, state dot preferred dot length, and at first it was 0, right? So when a new element is added, it should always point to the whatever the last element index was, okay? So hopefully this should work. Let's just do a dry run, okay? So when there are no items in this array, state.preferred.length would be 0, and it will start pointing to the first item whenever that item is added, okay? When there is one item in this array, state.preferred.length would be 1, and 1 means it will point to the second item. So yeah, this code should work, okay? Let's see if it works or not. Let's see what active gets after we refresh it, okay? So I'll write CHE and NAI, and this is the output that I got. So I'll add it, and now active is 0. Similarly, if I try to add another location over here, so maybe I'll add Kolkata. So I'll hit add. Now active is 1, which means it's pointing to Kolkata, India, right? So these are being updated properly. All right. We'll look into delete later on. Let's see. Let's first make the API call for this. Okay. So this particular part is basically done. So I'll remove this console log from here, and the work of search bar is basically done. It is getting that particular location and it is adding that to its correct position. Now we need to do the API call. So I'll go back to app.js, and this API call won't just be made when the unit state changes, but it will also be made when the first thing location state changes. So I'll get the location state over here, location state, and that should be location, okay? But inside location state, this API call would actually be made when the active location changes, right? So I'll do location state dot active, because whenever the user navigates to a new location, the data should be refreshed basically, okay? So whenever the location active changes, it will again make an API call, and the location that it gets, it will get it from, let's see where it gets it from. So currently this it's getting it from here, right? So it's basically doing a keyword based search. It's searching for Chennai. So instead of Chennai, can we search for the location that we are giving to the API? Let's see. So we want to search for it should be location state dot preferred square brackets active, and that's it. That should be it. All right. So active is not defined because it should be location state dot active. Okay. I hope this makes sense. So we are basically searching for that particular location state from that particular location state dot preferred array. We are searching for the index that is the active index. Okay. So it says that okay, yeah. So it obviously says that this is an object, because this is an object. That is why it's giving us a 404. So you can look into the API call. The query is coming as an object, and that is obviously true because this preferred location contains like. So what does it contain? It contains the name, and it also contains the. It will also contain the ID and the data, right? So it should be dot name. Okay. With this we can see that we can see that the latest API call that went through actually went for Kolkata, right? Now we if I add a new location, for example, if I add Mumbai, okay, and I add it, you'll see that another API call went through, and this time it went through for Mumbai. Okay. So the API calls are working, and we are also getting the data. You can see that this temperature reading over here changed. If I add Chennai again, which I can do right now because we didn't remove that check, we didn't add that check. So if I added Chennai, you see the temperature changes. So now let's actually view those locations over here in the location selector. Okay. So I'll go to the location selector, and this is the whole location state, right? So again, in order to show all of those locations down here, where were we showing it? Yeah, over here. What we can do is we can show the location state dot preferred, and then in here we can do location state dot active. Okay, so this will give us the current location, and hopefully it should come up, and it's not and dot name at the end. Okay, let's see. Preferred active. Oh, I did a typo over here. All right, let's try adding it again. Let's refresh. Cannot read properties of undefined reading name. Okay, where is it reading it for? In app.js. Okay, so this is where the error is coming from, and this time it's not throwing an error in this window because we were catching it over here in console logging it, right? So this is not actually, this should not actually happen. So what I'll do is I'll wrap this whole thing, this whole thing actually into, yeah, so I'll wrap this in an if block. So this will only go when the location state dot active is not equals null. Okay, so when it's not null, then only this should go through. So let's refresh it and see what happens. So yeah, now we are not getting any kind of random API calls. So now I'll add Chennai and add it. So now I'm getting the data for Chennai, and over here as well, I'm seeing only Chennai because there's only one item in the array. Okay. Now, when I click on both of these buttons, what I need to do is I need to dispatch these actions, location previous and location next, right? And if you look at the reducers for both of these, you'll see that it only updates the active property. See, that's what it's doing. It's only updating the active property, and the active property would not be an object like we discussed yesterday, because that was not a good pattern in my opinion. So the active property will only be like the index. Okay, so let's see, if we press these buttons, we should dispatch these actions, previous location and next location. Okay, So for this button, there's the handle left, right? And in the handle left, what were we doing? Earlier, we were using this dumb array, right? Now, all we need to do is we don't need this active location anymore because now the active location is being stored as a global state, right? So I'll remove this as well. And we don't need this data as well because in the location selector, we are not actually showing any data, right? So I'll remove that as well. Okay. And I'll remove this from here. And all of these are now giving errors, obviously. So I'll just remove everything from these handlers. And the handle left handler will write dispatch. So first I need to add the use dispatch hook. So I'll write dispatch and write use dispatch. Okay. And use selector was already there. So we can actually combine these imports over here like this. I'll remove these two things. And then I can dispatch the function. So I'll dispatch next location, or actually previous location for the left button. And then in here, I'll dispatch the next location. Okay. So these two are imported at the top and I'm dispatching them. So now if I click on these buttons, the next location and the previous location would be fired and the active value would change. Obviously, it's not doing that currently because there's only one item in the array. But let's check by adding another item. So I'll add Mumbai and add it. So now the data updated over here. I can go back to hopefully go back to the previous data. But it's not working for some reason. Let's see if these functions are being fired or not. So these are location next and location previous, right? So in these cases, let's just add a console log in the reducer itself and see if it is being fired or not. So I'll write next in here and I'll click on this button. So these functions are actually not working now. So what might be the reason? Let's see. So handle right is dispatching previous location and handle left is dispatching previous location and handle right is dispatching next location. If I go to the actions, let's see if these are being called. Console.log next. So I think the server stuck again, so I'll just refresh it. I'll add this. I'll also add Mumbai. Okay. So once I do that, I can click this button to get the data for each, like both of them one by one. Okay. So now like the whole application is hooked through properly and you'll see that everything is working properly. Like I can change the location and like the data gets updated for that particular location with the new, the latest data. And I can click this button to get the data in Fahrenheit and again in Celsius. And I can like basically cycle through multiple items. I can search for New York over here and I'll get New York City, US and New York, US. So I'll add New York, US and I'll get the data for all three of these one by one. Okay. But one thing that you might notice right now is, so it's basically getting the data, obviously getting the data properly. But one thing that you'll notice is that it only updates this data after it fetches the new thing, right? So if I'm on New York, US, it's showing me 9 degrees Celsius right now. If I go to Chennai, it will wait for a while before showing the data for Chennai. And that happens because the data is only updated after this comes through, right? Because this is not being saved anywhere. It is only being saved in the app.js. Like this weather data is being saved only at one place in the app.js. And that is not a good way to, deal with this data. And because since we are sending this data to all of the places, this should actually be stored in the reducer itself. And we actually planned for that, right? We said that we'll do that using the preferred location itself, and we'll store that under a data prop. So we'll do that now. So for that, we need to create another action. So this action will actually be called const update weather data equals to, and this will actually update the data based on, it will search by name and then update. Sorry about this. So I should use this. Okay. So now the type for this would be location underscore update. Okay. we are running a bit ahead of time. Like, I mean, we are running a little late, but let's see if we can finish this or not. So this data will be the whole JSON data that we get from this API over here. Okay. And this API, whenever it's called, it will update the weather data for the name that we send. Okay. And this name should be basically, or we can do this by the index as well, but I'm doing this by the name because in our, in our application, we are thinking of the name as a unique name, right? Like two different two different cities can't have the same name. That's what we are thinking in our application. That's why this name is always unique. So that is why we'll search by name and then update the data for that particular index wherever this name is found. Okay. So I'm returning this action over here, and then I'll add the handler for that in the reducer. So I'll do location. What was the name of the action? It was location update, right? So I'll add that over here at the break at the end. And yeah, obviously when you're using a switch case statement, you should add a break at the end. But when you're returning from any case, obviously that break is not needed. So we can safely remove that for now. Now in the location update, we need to do a few things. Find the index of the action dot name, append the data prop with action dot data, return new preferred sorry return new preferred location array. Okay, so these are the things that we need to do. And since in this scenario we'll only be returning the new preferred location array, and we will not be doing anything else. So and but yeah but we are changing the active index anyways when we are adding this. So this should all work. Okay. So now what we'll do is we'll tackle these steps one by one. So the first thing, find the index of where the action.name exists. Okay. So that the way we do that is by creating a copy. First of all, creating a copy of the preferred locations. So I'll do pref lock equals to copy of state dot preferred. Okay. Then I'll find something in here. I'll find the index, right? So I'll do find index of, and then from here I'll do locations or location data. And the way we do it is by location data dot name equals action dot name. Okay. So with this, we'll get the index for where we need to update. So now I'll store it somewhere. So I'll store it in target index. Okay. Then what we do is we update that particular particular index element at the index by doing this pref lock equals to pref lock square brackets target index dot data equals to action dot data. This is what we needed to do, right? So find the index, then append the data prop with action data. So this is how we are finding the index, this line, then we are appending, and then finally return it. So now return, and this new thing would be state comma preferred colon pref lock. Okay. So this was a new copy. This is a new array, right? So this preferred property would be updated. So it would obviously fire a re-render. If we were only using the previous array that was found, and then instead of doing this, if we did only state.preferred.find index and then state.preferred.act this thing, and then in here if we returned only state.preferred, this won't have worked. So that is why we did it like this. Okay. So let's just save it. We created a new copy, then we set that as the new preferred array over here. So this should now work. This should now save the data in Redux. And what do we get by this? So at the first time, obviously, there would be a slight delay for getting the data. but then after the first time, every time we get the data, it will basically fire the location update, and it will store the data in Redux itself. So that's what we need to do over here. Instead of calling set weather data, we need to dispatch the action. Okay, so we'll do that now. I'll write const dispatch equals to use dispatch. Okay, and I'll use that below. So before that, I'll remove these duplicate imports, and I use dispatch over here. Instead of setting the weather data like this, I'll do use dispatch set. Okay, let's see what was the action name. So update weather data, right? So I'll call update weather data, and it will ask me for a name and a data. So the name would be obviously the name would be location state. Yeah, so the name would be location state dot preferred location state dot active. Hold on. Actually, this is the name, right? So I'll just copy this down over here. This would be name, and the data would be basically this whole thing. Okay, so this dispatch function will be fired. React hook use dispatch is called in get weather data. Doesn't matter a React function component or nor a custom React hook function. The component names must start with an uppercase. Okay. So it's basically telling me that this is being called from an async function, and this async function is not not a component. That is why this is not something that it can do. So we do this. We can instead of doing this, what we can do is we can create a function for this. So I'll call it over here. I'll call const update weather data. Okay, and in here we'll basically hold on equals to, yeah. So in here we'll basically paste this whole thing. Wait, did I copy it over from over here? I didn't. Okay. So I'll copy it. I'll paste it over here. Oh, actually, the thing that I was doing wrong was I was writing use dispatch instead of writing the dispatch, because use dispatch is a hook, right? And what I need to do is I need to write the dispatch function. The hook has to be called directly under the component, but then the function can be called from anywhere inside the component. So the dispatch is called inside the use effect. Okay. Yeah, that was a stupid mistake. Okay, so now the dispatch function is will be responsible for updating the weather data, and then we can send that we can get all the data from inside sidebar and like multiple different places wherever we want. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll remove this weather data now, because now we don't need this weather data. And if I actually search for it, I'll see that it is being used in only these two places. So I'll remove this state now. Okay, and from down here also I'll remove these states, and it will start giving me multiple different errors at like multiple different places, hopefully. Okay, if I update this, it should happen. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to go to that particular component where I need that data. So for example, I need to go to the sidebar, and in here we get the location state, right? Inside here itself, we have all that weather data as well, right? So how do we get that weather data? So if preferred.length is greater than 0, then we'll most probably have that weather data, right? So the weather data can be got like, instead of you getting it from the props, what we can do is we can set the data over here, const data equals to, and this can be, so the data would be a complex, a complex this thing, like it would be a complex object, right? And we already had this optional chaining everywhere in place. So it should not be an issue if this thing is undefined at first, which it would be, because at first when the API call is going through for a new location, the data is not there. It only gets added after the first API call has went through, right? I hope that makes sense. So what we can do is in here we can write location state dot preferred. From there we want location state dot active. This is the whole location object. From there, we want the data. So this is the data. And now, so it basically says cannot read properties undefined reading data. Okay, yeah, this is happening because obviously location state dot preferred is an empty value, and then location state dot active is also null at first. So what we can do is we can check for whether active is null or not by actually, instead of doing that, we can just add a question mark over here. So that will optionally change it, and that error will go away. Now, if I write Chennai and add it, so cannot access prevlog before initialization. What does this mean? Did I call it before I initialize it? Let's see. What's prevlog? Where is it called? 53 location reducer. In the reducer itself. Okay, it's coming from line number 53 in app.js. So this is line number 53. Error. So it's catching some kind of error. So I'm dispatching the update weather data, and in the actions, in the update weather data, we are getting the name and data, right? And we are calling the location update. The reducer somewhere. So somewhere it's going wrong, and it's saying that the okay. So it's saying that in the location reducer line number 41. Okay, so this thing is going wrong. Okay. What did I do? It should be preferred location, and I wrote prev location. That's wrong. Okay. All right. So I'll write Chennai again, and I'll add it, and I'll get all the data related to Chennai. So yeah, this is working. Obviously, it was working before as well. So now I'll add Mumbai, and I'll add the location data for that as well. But now notice as I click back, what will happen? If I click back, I'll instantly get that data, and then the API call goes through. Like whenever I navigate, the previous stale data is being shown, like as long as the new data has not been fetched. So it's basically like all of the location data is being stored in Redux. That is why our UI is now looking snappy. So I can basically click it as many times as I want, and the API calls are going through multiple times, obviously, but the location is only being updated like very rarely, right? Like it's being updated instantly now. Earlier, it was being updated very rarely. So now our whole flow is complete, hopefully. I mean, there are a lot of different optimizations that you can do through this, and that's totally up to you to think of and customize this whole thing in your own style. But this is the whole application for now. So I think we are running a bit too late. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me now. And like if you feel that yeah, this is a bit too much to digest, obviously watch it again, and then you can ask questions if you want to do that.
Yes, we are allowed to rewatch some parts.
Yeah. Like was this a little too confusing for one day, or like what's your feedback? What do you guys say?
Uh, I mean, I certainly did learn a lot of things about this.
Yeah. Like understanding the flow of Redux and like structuring your applications like properly is really important, or else it gets too confusing. I won't say that this structure that we use for the location reducer is the best structure, but obviously it is since it was working for the sake of explanation, I did that. But you might find something that fits your style of coding better. But yeah, that's the only part where you might have found it confusing. But you should give it a look again, like look at the recording, and like you might understand, you might find all of this more understandable. All right, so if you don't have any questions, Arvind, Ritvik, then I guess we can leave.
Right, just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, will you upload those recordings?
Yeah, yeah, stop.
Yeah, then. Okay, then bye.
All right. Bye bye.